All right, so you've got the schedule. When we call you up for the 100 Years Award, when we get to that point, just send one person up, go back, and then Jason and Jackson will make arrangements for your whole group to get located in some corner of the room here so we can take a picture and you can go back home and let all the houses in your area that contributed that money know that we really did appreciate it. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn over this session to Dr. Gitlow, and it is heroin addiction then and now. Is that yours? Okay. Jane, do you have mine?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second session for today. Welcome to my panel. Thank you all for being here. Yeah, I had some questions this morning at the first session about Suboxone. They were tough questions. And really, although we've been talking about Suboxone and Vivitrol and Methadone over the past few years, this is the first time that we've really gotten into this debate as to medication versus non-medication in the treatment of opioid use disorder. Now, it led me to the point where I figured it's time to tell at least my story of the background as to how I came to this. I was trained in addiction treatment about 30 years ago, and the treatment at that point primarily was of alcoholism. And remember, the number one leading cause of death in addiction is tobacco. Number two leading cause of death is alcohol. Opioids are a long way off. Even now, they're still quite a ways below alcohol and tobacco. So most of the patients that we saw in the office were patients dealing with alcohol use disorder. My clinic was on a small island off Cape Cod, Nantucket, for anybody familiar with the area. Nantucket would have about 7 people die each year in a population of about 5,000 or 6,000 at the time. About 7 people would die each year of heroin overdoses. We never saw any of the folks using heroin in the office. No one came in. The alcoholics would come in. The heroin folks wouldn't. They would either be arrested or they would die. Those were their two opportunities for the future. Then all of a sudden, buprenorphine came out, Suboxone came out. All of a sudden, folks who were using heroin decided, okay, there's a third possible route for me besides jail or dying. And they came into the office. They could have come into the office before. We would have done the same thing we did with the alcohol crew. Psychotherapy, go to 12-step, work the program, all of the above. But they didn't come in. Now all of a sudden they were coming in. So we started them on Suboxone, not knowing what else we could do for these folks. The mortality rate on Nantucket dropped from 7 per year to 0. Right? The next year, it was 0. So I said, my God, this is a miracle drug. You know, for a guy who doesn't believe in drugs, right? I grew up with my dad sitting there looking at me while we were watching TV. He was an internist, and a TV commercial would come on, doctors recommend Excedrin. And I'd look at Dad, I'd say, do you recommend Excedrin? He's like, I hate that drug. And next TV commercial, more doctors recommend whatever. And I'd look at him, and he would always be like, no, that's a terrible drug. So one day I looked at him, I was probably about 8, and I said, what's a good drug? He said, there are none. Okay, so that's the way I grew up. I came into this thinking, how can I not prescribe a medication? But Suboxone, getting that mortality rate down from 7 per year on the island to 0, astonished me. So 3 years go by. We're prescribing Suboxone to the folks who need it on Nantucket. And as you know, back in the day, we had a limit of the number of patients we were allowed to prescribe Suboxone to. The limit was 30. Right? Here I am, an addiction doc, treating roughly 700 people in my clinical practice. Only 30 can have opioid use disorder. That's absurd, unless you're someplace like Nantucket, where there are probably only about 10 people who were going to show up in the office. The other 20 came in. They took the ferry from Hyannis, right? 2 hours, 3 hours on a ferry to see me to get treatment, the prescription for Suboxone, then they'd return and go back on the ferry. So all of a sudden, about 20 people are coming in from off island. Then our cap went up from 30 to 100. Well, now 70 people, 80 people are coming from off the island to get treatment. What did the townspeople say? Why are you bringing these junkies to our island? We don't have a heroin problem here. And they looked at our clinic, which was a public clinic. It was a Family and Children's Services, right? They looked at our clinic and they said, we're not funding you anymore if you continue to treat all these people with Suboxone for their opiate use disorder, because we don't have a heroin problem here. So I looked at them and I said, well, if you're not going to allow us to treat a disease state, I've been here 20 years, I'm out of here. And the patients can come with me and they can continue to see me in my office back on the Cape, which I did, which they did, at which point their mortality rate went back up to what it had been. And we said, that ain't right. So I called up one of the doctors there, Dr. Lepre. I said, can't you learn how to prescribe Suboxone for these folks? And he did, and he started a small practice seeing them, knowing what had happened with the town. And we got the mortality rate back down to where it ought to be. But again, the way this drug works is, first of all, it brings people who would not have otherwise come into the office to the office. If they don't want to take Suboxone, that's fine. I don't insist on it. But they can come in and they have alternatives, medically reasonable alternatives, like go to AA or NA, like live in a sober living environment, like work the program. That's one option. You can do that. If that is all it takes to make you better, by all means, do it. But the Suboxone makes it so that the craving goes away, so that they can work the program, so that they can do the 12 steps, so that they can do everything else. If they're abusing it, if they're doing it the wrong way, by all means, let me know. All I wanted is a phone call from a friend saying, by the way, Mr. Johnson isn't quite doing what you think he's doing. Okay. That tells me what I'm going to talk with Mr. Johnson about the next time he shows up. But for the most part, it works. And it means that these folks, and I've Googled my patients, I know very well that almost every one of them has a criminal history. And I know when they're on probation, and I know when they're in jail because they don't show up. And I know that while they're in treatment and they come in each time and they get their prescription each time and their urines are clean each time, my God, well, they're not on probation and they're not in jail. So something is getting better. So over the years, my feeling, and I've been prescribing Suboxone for 10, 12 years now, I think. And over these years, I've truly become convinced that this drug at least lets people through the transition years, if not more. So I'm very positive about it, and I do understand, by all means, it can be abused just like anything can be abused. It can be sold on the street just like almost anything can be sold on the street. What I do see is that as an increasing number of healthcare providers are willing to prescribe it, there's decreased street value. It seems to me that most of the street value, at least a lot of it in my area, was driven by the fact that patients couldn't get treatment if they wanted treatment. And now that the treatment is more readily available, the value of the drug on the street has gone down. Because $15 or $10 per strip of Suboxone makes no sense when you can go into the office and for the price of an office visit, which in many places can be $60, $80, $100, is less than they would pay on the street for the drug. So, it's starting finally to balance out and make sense. But again, are there folks out there who will misuse? Are there folks out there who will use it as a way of making money? Sure, and we all need to keep our eyes open for that and do our best within that system. Now, All that is to say that here we have a drug which on the opioid side of the fence seems to work to reduce craving while not producing the negative side effects that heroin, Percocet, and so forth can provide, without the negative consequences in overdose, right? You can't really overdose on Suboxone. We don't have a drug like that for marijuana. We don't have a drug like that for alcohol. We don't have a drug like that for cocaine or methamphetamine. The only thing for which we have that drug is heroin and the equivalents. So it puts all of us in this room, in this section where suddenly we're dividing the addiction population into these two groups, one of which is going to get a medication, potentially addictive medication, and the rest of which are not. And how do we have that balance? So I understand the issues as they come up, and I certainly understand where all the good questions are coming from, and look forward to many more of them over the course of the next day or two. Let me start to move into our panel on the opiate crisis specifically, and look forward to all of you and seeing you throughout the time, and hope you all have a good conference. I'll see more of you tomorrow. Dr. Sharfstein's first up.
Well, thank you. Again, it's great to be here and see so many people and recognize how much incredible work you do. I'm going to very briefly tell three stories from my work working on the opioid epidemic at the School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins. We go around the country and we work with communities, with mayors, with counties, states, and try to help them reduce the toll of the opioid epidemic. And before I forget, I mentioned this before, if anyone might be interested in studying public health, we have a full scholarship program that is part-time. You can do it from wherever you are, and if you're interested, it's at americanhealth.jhu.edu. You can check it out. So 3 really quick stories. I want to talk about a mayor, a doctor who works in a jail, and a police commissioner. And the first is the mayor of Huntington, West Virginia, who I met at and he was talking about the problem that he noticed in EMS, that people were responding to so many overdoses that they were getting jaded and cynical. And at one point he said he heard one of the ambulance drivers say that they had been to 8 resuscitations of people in their high school class in Huntington. And another time he heard someone say that, wouldn't this person just die already? Because otherwise they'll have to keep coming back. And he said, as a city, we're better than that. And he put in place a program to help deal with the burnout that the ambulance drivers face and actually put counselors and peers on the ambulances, both to help the EMS workers and to help the people who were getting resuscitated. Because of course, if people are feeling so cynical and desperate and sad about the whole thing, they're not going to be really good caregivers. So they were there both to help the ambulance drivers and the people who are getting resuscitated, connect them to treatment, and they've seen a lot of success in Huntington. That's number one. The second one was a doctor who works in a jail. His name is Josiah Rich in Rhode Island. And Rhode Island is a unique state because it's pretty small. It's very small, and there's only one jail and one prison in the whole state of Rhode Island. And what that means is they're both located in the same spot. So everyone goes in one door, everyone comes out one door for both the jail and the prison. And what they realized was that when you went into jail or prison, your chance of dying of an overdose was over 100 times higher than the general population. And that was because for somebody who was using opioids. And the reason is people who had a tolerance to opioids, they would lose the tolerance behind bars. They would come out, use their dose, overdose, and die. It's a very, very common story. And Dr. Rich said if we could get people treatment, we could offer them treatment of whatever kind they want. It could be counseling, it could be naltrexone, it could be methadone, it could be buprenorphine. If we got people started in treatment while they were in either the jail or the prison, every single person to be offered treatment, would we see success? And he was able to convince the governor to put $4 million into treatment in that one spot in Rhode Island. And what they found, they published the research, a 60% reduction in overdose deaths, 60% reduction in overdose deaths. And they set up programs to help people not only get started in treatment when they were there so that they didn't have that 100-fold increase in risk, but now actually they had a decreased risk of treatment of death because they were in treatment and able to transition to care. And the third story is the police commissioner, and the police commissioner's name is Brandon Del Pozo in Burlington, Vermont. And Chief Del Pozo looks like, everyone who I guess wears uniform looks like a police commissioner, but he kind of looked like a police commissioner. But when he starts talking, he says, we have to do something different if we're going to be successful on the opioid epidemic. I don't want to keep arresting people and seeing them die. And so he developed a series of programs to try to get all the agencies in Burlington together to talk about people with addiction and help them get into recovery housing. One of the things he did was he started a program in the syringe services program, in the syringe exchange in Burlington. Now, I met the head of the syringe exchange program in Burlington, and she said that they led the state in referrals to drug treatment that nobody ever went to, because it was always like, come back in a week, and that time it was too late. And she always had a dream of starting people on drug treatment right there. And when you can give a medication like Suboxone, people do not go into withdrawal. You stop the withdrawal, and then people can think about all the other things that matter to them. And so they started that program, and they got all these different patients, about a third of the people were interested in treatment. And people thought, well, people go into syringe exchange, they're not interested in treatment. Actually, they got a lot of people interested in treatment. And then Chief Del Pozo told us a story where his police officer picked someone up and was in a car, and the person was crying, and they said, why are you crying? He said, because now I'm going to go into withdrawal, they're going to throw me in jail again. And he said, actually, I'm going to take you over to treatment. You're going to get the first dose. You're not going to go into withdrawal, and then we're going to put you in this program and support you. And the person said, cried even harder, because he'd never been treated like that before. And they're really committed in Burlington and other places to a treatment-first kind of approach that really helps a lot more people. And last year, Burlington saw a huge decline in overdose deaths, even relative to the state of Vermont. So I know how challenging this is, but like you all, I see signs of hope, in the work that I do. I see signs of hope, not just at the individual level, but for whole communities, if it's possible to think, to listen, and to follow the evidence. So thank you very much.
Hi, sweetie. All right. Thanks. Hope you don't mind if I use a few notes here. I'm a person in long-term recovery named Paul. On June 30th of this year, I celebrated 18 years in recovery. I moved into an Oxford house in Richmond, Virginia in 2002, right after my last incarceration. I lived there for 2.5 years. Shortly after becoming an alumnus in 2004, I was hired as an outreach worker, and today I'm a regional manager for Virginia in the District of Columbia. On behalf of all the Oxford houses and the OHI staff in the area, I would just like to welcome you again to DC and to the 21st Oxford House World Convention. And I am honored and grateful that Paul asked me to speak to you today, although that basically means that he thought to himself, I need to find some real dope fiends for this panel. And apparently he immediately thought of me. And on top of that, since he asked for a variety of perspectives on addiction to opioids then and now, we decided we'd speak in descending order of time in recovery. And it turns out that means I get to go first. So I'm not just one of his go-to dope fiends, I'm the oldest go-to dope fiend in the bunch. Although I will still always be Paul Jr. around here. The truth is I'm incredibly grateful to have made it to the point where I'm kind of an old-timer dope fiend in this organization, because the only other choice I could have made would have put me in the ground a long time ago. So let me share briefly about addiction to opioids in earlier days. I got clean in 2001, so my active addiction was throughout the 1990s. There was a perception then, particularly in certain parts of the country, the Pacific Northwest, Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, that heroin was having a revival and reaching a new generation of young people. It was expressing itself in the culture of what was starting to be described as Generation X. That was us, yay nihilism. Certainly in the music, with Nirvana and the rest of the grunge scene hitting it big, but even in places like high fashion, where they were describing the new look as heroin chic. And while the various forces that would soon lead to the opioid prescription crisis were already building toward that, pills were not as prevalent and were not a part of my story as they almost invariably were in the next generation of addicts. I went straight to heroin. And I went straight to the powdered heroin capital of the country, New York City, which was ground zero for a sudden influx of pure, higher quality heroin, which attracted a larger population of middle-class drug users because it was good enough that you could snort it instead of having to use it intravenously. I started snorting heroin while I was in school in DC, but we were scoring it in New York, and as soon as I finally graduated, that's where I went. And the details of how my addiction progressed are predictable. Within a year or so, I was no longer snorting, I was shooting, and then shooting a fair amount of cocaine along with it as well. And this is when celebrity musicians like River Phoenix and Chris Farley and Kurt Cobain and Jerry Garcia were either dying directly from fatal overdoses of heroin or speedballs or indirectly as a result of their addiction. And it was a big deal because it was something that really hadn't been happening as much up until then. And even among the regular addicts like me, there were overdoses, and I had a couple close calls of my own. But it was still, fortunately, a little unusual for those overdoses to be fatal. A fatal overdose was, unfortunately, part of my story when I came to one morning in 1999 to find my girlfriend lying in bed, cold and blue. It was a terrible tragedy for her and her family. It was traumatic for me. I caught a felony distribution charge over it. But I wish the unusual nature of that kind of terrible loss had remained. But as you all know, and the other speakers will attest to, one difference between then and now is that fatal overdoses have become far, far too common, like heartbreakingly common. As an employee of Oxford House for the last 15 years, I have watched the death toll go up and up and up, beyond what I could have ever imagined, even as a former heroin addict. Worst of all, I've watched the death toll inside our houses go up and up. It's the worst part of doing this job. Watching often really young people finally make it to what should be a safe haven, an environment that will nurture recovery, give them freedom from addiction, only to end up with their life cut short, to be discovered dead by their family of recovering addicts in an Oxford House. Not in Oxford House, but across the country as a whole, by the time this general session is over, somewhere around 15 more sons or daughters, mothers or brothers will be found dead from a drug overdose. That is a terrible, terrible difference between then and now. Not only was my experience with heroin before the explosion of opioid prescription abuse and the explosion of fatal overdoses brought on in particular by fentanyl, but it was also before the explosion of access to medication-assisted recovery options. Suboxone and Subutex weren't even on the market yet, and there were far less people using methadone than there are today. I was a straight-up heroin addict, but methadone was not part of my story at all. When I kicked without medication, sometimes holed up in some squalid apartment in New York or DC, sometimes in a jail cell. Unfortunately, as a result, I was one of those well-indoctrinated NA recovering addicts that wore his not having used medication to get into recovery as this twisted badge of honor that made my recovery superior to those that did otherwise. And that kept me closed-minded for a long time to the benefits and importance of medication-assisted recovery. I am happy to say that I continue to grow in my recovery, and my position on MAR has evolved. And today I embrace the life-saving role medication-assisted recovery can play in the lives of sick and suffering addicts. As does Oxford House, as an organization. That's another difference between then and now, and that's a really positive one. Then for me, and now for all of you, my life was saved by stumbling into an Oxford House. A newfound willingness to admit defeat and surrender, the incredible support of my fellow recovering addicts in Narcotics Anonymous, but most importantly, the sense of community and accountability that I needed 24/7, not just for 1 hour per day, is why I am blessed to be standing here talking to you today and not a pre-epidemic casualty of opioid addiction. Thank you, family.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lori. I'm a woman in long-term recovery, and my sobriety date is December 20th of 2006. And I'm also a part of the then group for this panel. So I like to kind of show people what it look. I work in Louisiana, and I'm the regional manager for Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, the newest of states, Florida. There's my group over there. And so we're on the I-10 corridor, which is, there's a lot of drugs that are transported through there. And of course, heroin and fentanyl is one of the biggest ones through there. So we do see a lot of overdose deaths. But I come from I was more of the prescription generation. So my DOC was Oxycontins. I loved Oxycontins. And I snorted them for maybe 2 months, and then I went straight into IV drug use with it. And I stayed in it for 6 years, and I overdosed a couple times. And I was very grateful that they had It's not as prevalent. Narcan was not as prevalent back then as it is today, but it should have been. We did lose a few people, probably from not having access to Narcan, but the overdoses weren't as frequent back then as they are today. So let me show you real quick. I put these, always something with this technology. Come on, okay, so I'm gonna show you 3 pictures. Let's see, let's try this thing. This was me in '94, pre-opioid use. That was the year I graduated. That's nice, huh? Let me fast forward a minute. That was at the height of my addiction. Brings tears to my eyes. I'm a sobby one. And this is me today, me and Jason. We do recover. We do recover from opioid addiction. The doctor was talking about this morning that it's harder for people that are on methamphetamines, opioids, and crack cocaine to recover. And I believe that. How many people in here have been addicted to those 3 drugs? He said that people that were on marijuana and alcohol, they have a higher chance of being able to recover without help, without assistance from 12-step programs and things like that. And I believe that is why a lot of these Oxford houses are open today, is for people like us, the people that, this is the last house on the block for us, is Oxford House. Opioid addiction has changed so much, and I see so many people dying. I know you all see it, your friends. I have a 24-year-old son, and there's a lot of people in his generation, people that come into Oxford House that overdose and die every day, and it's so sad. My fiance is a police officer. He's a detective in Washington Parish, and he tells me about calls that he has to go out on where there's 4 people in a house, and all 4 of them have to be Narcan back to life because of fentanyl. And it's very scary because we're losing an entire generation of people. And there's a generation after them, a lot of children that are losing their parents. They're gonna grow up, they're gonna be 18, 19 years old, and they're gonna be without both of their parents. And there's probably thousands and thousands of children like that. One of the things back whenever I was trying to get sober is it was harder to get help. Quinetta Womack is one of the state people for Louisiana. She works for the Office of Behavioral Health. And she was telling us about a program yesterday that helps pregnant women or women that have children that are born with NOWS, which is they're addicted to opioids. And they have this program in Louisiana that houses them and helps them, puts them in treatment with their children to help them get their children back and reunify their children with the parent, or really never take them away from them if they stay on the right track. When I got sober, that was what kind of sent me into recovery. Is I got pregnant and I had a daughter that was born addicted to opioids. And back then, DCFS, it's like they would take the child away from you and they would tell you, you go figure out what you got to do to get better. And that was it. They were more concerned, and rightfully so, about the child. But I wasn't able to do it. I didn't have the resources to do it. And I'm thankful today to see that there's so many more resources for mothers with children, fathers with children. There's a lot of single fathers out there. We have men in children's houses that are helping the dads with their kids. And I think that's amazing. Medically assisted treatment is very, very different than what it used to be. I was also very opposed to medically assisted treatment whenever the government first started kind of, using it as an evidence-based practice. And I believe myself and Jackson and Dr. Gitlow and maybe Paul were on a panel a few years ago, and we all got into a big argument about medically assisted treatment. But when I went to the methadone clinic, and when I went to the methadone clinic, you just go and you get your dose of liquid methadone, or maybe they give you a wafer, it just depends on what level you were on. And you saw this counselor, but the counselor was like, how you doing? And you're like, good. And they're like, good. And you go on about your way. It was maybe 5 minutes. There was really no treatment with it. And what I would do is, we all know how to pass a drug test. So I was in the midst of like this crystal meth phase and on top of my opioid addiction. So I would fake my drug screens and then I'd tell them it wasn't working. And the clinic that I went to, and I think back then it was just a little bit different, they would just up my dose. So I knew that they would give me more if I told them it wasn't working. And I don't think they do that as much today. So I think that the view of medically assisted treatment by professionals is really changing, and they're really starting to do more wraparound programs with people. They're monitoring their behavior, they're monitoring the things that go on in their life, they're actually counseling them, they're treating them. They're not just giving them a medication and sending them on their way. So that's a very beautiful thing. I have several residents that live in the houses throughout my area that it's very, very successful for, and I'm so happy to see it, because at the rate that everybody's dying, we're not gonna have anybody to treat in 10 years. We're all gonna die off, and it's not fair to, let this stigma get in the way of saving somebody's life. And I'll close with, anything is possible. There's always going to be hope if there's life. And I'm very grateful for Oxford House, because I know I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Oxford House. I come straight out of jail into an Oxford House. I was a reentry person. And if I would have went back to the small little town I'm from, Bogalusa, Louisiana, I would have ended up right back with the same old group of people doing the same old thing. And I'd most likely be dead today. So thank you all for letting me share.
Hey everybody, my name is Nicola Bartow. Who here is excited about their recovery? Cool, awesome. Me too. I'm so nervous to be up here, so thanks for that icebreaker. I'm a person in long-term recovery. My recovery date is April 18th, 2012. So I'm also a pre-fentanyl stage person, but I feel like I'm almost in the middle of the group. So, but before I start, I wanted to share that I work at the corporate office here in Silver Spring, Maryland. I work in the finance department. I'm an alumni of the Oxford Houses of Delaware. Who's here? Oxford House Valorian was my house. Okay, so in all of my using, IV opiates was the most consistent. I think we all know we have seasons of drugs of choices and things like that, but that was the one that was the most consistent for me. And a lot of things happened as a result of that. There was a lot of pain meds then and just heroin. I had a boyfriend die of an overdose. I experienced a ton of homelessness, and that was like a mindset that carried far into my recovery. So another thing too was I was so used to being institutionalized. I went from hospital, psych ward, rehab, to a strict recovery house, back to the streets, homeless shelter, when I'm allowed in a building. So I got clean at 21, and when I was so used to having authorities telling me what to do, and also being so young. And so Oxford House changed my life with having a voice and a vote. I think that's my favorite thing about it. Being so young in recovery and already feeling down and have always been told where to go, what to do, and bedtimes and things like that, and having a vote was just life-changing for me. A thing I wanted to touch on was that I think the most important to take away from this is how, and as far as with Oxford House goes, is that even though we all were in different eras and times and drugs of choices and things, but Oxford House and recovery was still the solution for every single one of these eras. So, yeah, I'm so glad to be here. I get so nervous about doing stuff like this, but then I actually love it. I'm such an extrovert, and it's a dream come true, honestly. So in recovery, this time last year, with 6 years clean, I had a series of illnesses, and I was put on pain meds again. And I was on pain meds for so long, and it wasn't like a lot of strong stuff, but it was so long that I had ended up going through a little bit of a withdrawal, and that was, I was starting this job last year, 2018, and starting this job was the light at the end of my tunnel for that. And so Oxford House saved my life a second time. And I'm so grateful for that. So yeah, today I am healthy, no meds, I'm in perfect health, recovery stronger than ever. I love my job, and I believe my job loves me too. My kids are here with me, and I'm feeling the unity of everybody meeting my children and my family and my work coming together. I mean, wow, I am truly blessed. And so, yeah, we're all here today celebrating recovery and a new way of life, and I'm glad to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amber Pope. I am in recovery as well. My sobriety date is June 28th, 2016. So I am also an opiate addict, among many other drugs. But I started off using pain pills when I was in a bad car wreck in high school. And immediately I started abusing them. For a while, I'm from the same small town Lori's from, Bogalusa, Louisiana. There's nothing there but drugs. And we had, nothing. We had, they had this doctor that was called the Fiend Down program. Imagine that. So once I was addicted, I was fully addicted to Lortabs at 18, 19 years old. I was, and I was still in school. I was doing what I was supposed to do, but my addiction was running rampant. And I didn't really understand that. I didn't know it. All my whole family, there was, everybody be like, oh, we have this one uncle in our family who's bad. Well, there's only like one good one in my family. So we were all addicts. So if I couldn't get it from the doctor, if I couldn't get it from the streets, I had my family to fall back on. They'd just give it to me. So that's when taking pain medicine wasn't enough for me. I'm from they're all from the before. I'm from the now. And that was before. I was scared of needles for a long time, and I'll never forget the first time. Like I said, those pain pills weren't enough to eat anymore. It wasn't enough to snort anymore. I needed it a different way. And I'll never forget that first time. You know what I mean? Just putting a needle in my body with an opiate in it and being like, oh my God, I'm on Mars. It was amazing to me. But the things it took from me, and the crazy, horrible things I did, if I had to get out that bed, the abuse of family members, the lions, cheating, stealing, whatever. It was crazy. It happened seemed like it was overnight. But anyway, I don't want to talk about all that. What I want to talk about is how I got here, standing right here today. So I've been addicted to many, many things, not just substances. But this is about opioids. So I've always, just like Nicholas said, I've always been, that's always been consistent for me. Even I'd be off of it for a little while and then I'd pick right back up. So, and it was always the same thing for me. I'd go to rehab, I'd get out, use, go to prison, get out, use, go back to the same place, same people, same things. Every time I got out of prison, I was getting high. The same day, or staying high while I was locked up. There was never any treatment, and I thought I was just okay with that. I was like, oh, well, this is where I'm from. Everybody in my family's like this. I'm just going to be like this the rest of my life. They're just going to send me back to prison. I was content in prison, honestly. I was like, whatever, at least I know where I'm going to sleep, I'm going to eat. And if I want to get high, we'll figure it out. But the last time I got out of prison, the third time they put me in drug court, I ran again, and they were like, not this time. You're going to back up this time, or you're going to do this, you're going to do this drug court thing. And they sent me to St. Slaminy. If you're from Louisiana, then you know what I'm talking about. I didn't have any other options but an Oxford House. So when I got out of treatment, they sent me back to treatment instead of revoking me. And I took it serious this time. I got sober in New Orleans, Louisiana. And got out and went into an Oxford House November 16th of 2016. And I was like she said as well, just authority. I was just like, okay, what do I do now? I was waiting on somebody to tell me when to go to sleep, when to do this, when to do that. But this time it was different. It was like, here's your freedom. Here's your foundation. What are you going to do with it? And I was on many, many behavior contracts, but I took them seriously. I took them very seriously because I felt like the women in my house were going to, I don't know, I envied them. I was like, well, dang, she got some nice shoes. I like shoes. Her parole officer don't pop in as many times as mine does. What do I need to, you know what I mean? Like I picked up on them things, and I didn't envy women anymore. Or I wasn't jealous or wasn't against women anymore. And so Oxford House pulled me out of that, and it gave me that foundation, that that room to grow and to find out who I was as a woman, because I got sober at 27. I spent 21 to 27 in prison. You know what I mean? So it was time for a change, but I want to back up a little bit. When I was 21, I had a stroke because of endocarditis, and I was hospitalized I was almost 3 months until they found out that I was shooting Roxy's into my, whatever that thing is they put on my heart. I was shooting in it. They were like, you got to go. I didn't, I was like, oh well, take me off the transplant list. I'll just die again. You know what I mean? I didn't care. That's how serious it was for me. But anyway, so back to being in Oxford House and finding out who I was as a woman, much less anything. I didn't know how to do anything in life. I had to learn how to bathe regularly. I had to learn how to talk to people. My coworkers and my boss always tell me, don't be so ghetto. Just calm down. And I had to say that, but it's the truth, because I'm still learning how to be, 3 years in I'm still learning how to be a woman and how to be a person in recovery, not that old junkie or that old whatever from Bogalusa, Louisiana. So anyway, fast forward to this year a little bit. So I started working for Oxford House last summer. I started in Louisiana, and then I moved to Biloxi, Mississippi, and became an outreach in Mississippi, and that was some real training. But it got me ready for Florida. So moving from Louisiana to Florida, it was a big deal to me. I don't have any kids. You know, I was like, hey, this is what I want to do. I'm very, very passionate about Oxford House and recovery. So my mother had got sick while I was like in the beginning of the year. So every Friday I was traveling back to Baton Rouge because I put her in the hospital, and back to Pensacola on Sunday. Well, this one time my car got stolen in Baton Rouge. So I got a rental the next day. Thank God for my boss who stayed. I just opened a house on April 1st. This happened on April 6th. First house in Pensacola, had residents in it. I'm gone, can't get back. My boss stepped in and was like, I got you. Well, coming back through Alabama, I was in a little bitty rental, and I totaled the rental out. And I woke up in the hospital with some really, really important people to me. Lori Holtzclaw, Chandra Brown, and Summer Como were around me in that hospital room. Now, processing that since April, if I was still out in the streets, nobody would have cared. I wouldn't have had people come from 3 different states, not in Alabama, to come and be by my side. Anyway, but they gave me, I was really beat up. I had staples in my head, broke my wrist in 2 places. I suffered a miscarriage. Many other issues. I still have extensive nerve damage, but they were giving me morphine. They kept giving me morphine, and every time I'd come to, I'd freak out. I'd scream at them, stop giving me morphine. I'm an opiate addict. Like this, I don't want this at all. But they kept giving it to me. So I remember waking up in the hospital to find out my mom, who had been sick, had passed away. And, you know, so anyway. Woo, I love y'all. So, I remember when they told me that, I freaked out. You know what I mean? I was freaking out. And I was about to army crawl out the hospital because I couldn't barely walk. And Chandra Brown grabbed me by my shoulder because I was freaking out trying to pull IVs out. I need to get back to Louisiana. And she was like, the doctor was like, no, no, no. And I was like, I'm out of here. She kind of helped me drag my leg across the floor to the door so they would sign my paperwork so I could get out of there. And they stayed with me and took care of me while I planned a funeral. But at the same time, they sent me home with Roxy's. They sent me home with muscle relaxers and other things that I needed them. I couldn't physically move. I could barely do anything. I was very, very much hurt. And I was back on Roxy's for 11 days. I was in Louisiana. And on that 12th day, I planned on coming back to Florida. That's all I wanted to do. I needed to get back to Florida. That was my life. That's where my Oxford House was. That's where my residents who I've already bonded with were. That's where the people who saved me were. That's the life I built. But when I woke up on that 12th day, I was sick. And that was the scariest feeling in the world because here I am, just got an Oxford House and OHI check deposited. I'm in Louisiana with another rental and nothing but drug addicts around me, and that's my family and I love them, but what were they going to do? I'm grown. What are they going to do, stop me? I'm just being honest. Well, that's where my mind was. What am I going to do now? I got all this money and this rental. I'm gone. But all I wanted to do was get back to my safe haven. This. You know what I mean? This, right here. But anyway, so that happened. That was really hard for me, and still since April. Of course, that first pain pill that I took about the 5th or 6th day when I woke up and I was in excruciating pain, that's when it scared me. It was like, oh no, there's that feeling again. It wasn't just, oh my God, I'm in pain, I need to kill this pain. It was that, I think I'm high. I think I'm loaded. You know what I mean? And I had to start all over again. I felt like in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, a relapse. In my mind, I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm going back out. Oh my God, what am I going to do now? But thank God. Thank God for my coworkers and thank God for Oxford House, because if I didn't have that to go back to, and those people who supported me through that and still do to this day, I wouldn't be here right now. One more thing I want to tell y'all. So when I landed in Atlanta on Tuesday, my brother FaceTimed me. I was still on the plane. It was crazy. My brother FaceTimed me, and we talk a lot. We're really close. But he FaceTimed me showing me my sister-in-law who didn't have a pulse in a bathroom in a hotel who had just OD'd on fentanyl and was screaming and crying and asking me how to work the Narcan. That was the craziest thing ever. I'm like, what? I don't know what to do. You know, she's alive, thank God. I'm gonna try to help her as much as I can. She's got to want it herself, but I had to walk my brother through somebody who's been my sister-in-law for 25 years on how to work some Narcan on her. That is so scary to me because I've been there before. You know, I've OD'd on fentanyl a couple times. Pills started me off, but heroin is definitely what finished me off. Yeah, so I don't know. I know that it all comes down to the recovery and the support and no matter what drug I was on or no matter what I did or how many charges I caught or whoever or whatever, none of that matters to me. Because a room full of people like you loved me until I couldn't love myself. And was there for me after the most horrific things in my life had happened in recovery. So I don't know, guys. Like Lori said, we do recover. It's obvious. Look at all these people in this room. We do recover. And I love y'all so much. And thank you.
Hi, my name is Caroline. I'm a person in long-term recovery. And what that means to me is I haven't had a drink or a drug since June 19th of 2018. All right, so I'm gonna ask you all a question first. How many of y'all have ever done heroin? Okay, so majority. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going on about the beginning, okay? Because we kind of know how that starts off. You know, it starts off with the alcohol and the weed, probably a little bit of pills, you know, they go away, and then we fall into heroin, right? By the way, I'm 24 years old, so I'm the now. So my DOC is heroin. I didn't start really getting into heroin until I graduated. I like to say that I graduated high school and I majored in heroin. Heroin took me to a very scary place. A lot of those places included strip clubs and drug houses. That's kind of where I stayed. It's where I lived because, you know, I couldn't get high at mom's house very long. So I stayed there. Eventually, that plummeted me into getting into some pretty serious relationships with some of the people that own those houses. A lot of those were pimps. And so I kind of did what we do, a lot of us, to maintain that habit. You know, and I thought I had it under control, right? I get to choose what I'm doing with me to get my drugs, right? I'm the one in control. I'm getting to tell you what I'm doing for how much and all this good stuff, right? So I thought I was in control. I thought I was a successful heroin addict, right? Okay. So that quickly turned, okay? And it ended very badly, and we're going to get kind of serious. Because where I'm from, I forgot to say this, I'm also alumni of Oxford in Kentucky. Okay. So where I'm from, and I know in other areas of the United States, sex trafficking is a real thing, okay? It's not this thing that you see on CSI or in movies or whatever. It's a real thing. And I see a lot of girls come out of it. And I work with a lot of girls that come out of it because it's where I came from. So those drug houses and that pimp eventually turned into full-blown sex trafficking, right? Where I was brutally sexually assaulted and brutally beaten on a daily basis, but was okay with it. All that madness, I was okay with, as long as I had that syringe of dope. Everything was fine. You could do anything to me. You could hit me as many times as you wanted to. You could have as many people in the room with me as you wanted to. As long as I had that drug, I was fine. I didn't care. That eventually got worse, because my bottom has trap doors, right? You think it got bad, it got worse. It eventually went into the point where I was locked, and anybody know what a shotgun house is? Right, it's one that goes straight back. So those usually have like 2 rooms, right? There was a room in the back, and I was locked, okay? There was a lock on the outside, could not get out. And I was held in one of those rooms, and that is where I stayed. And that is where people were able to come in and out. And I did not care, I did not fight, I did not try to get out of that room, because every time somebody came in that room, guess what they had? A shot of dope. So I stayed. So I know that's kind of dark and scary, but that's the reality for a lot of people, for a lot of girls, and not just girls, men, because don't think you're exempt, because I've seen that too. Until eventually, I don't know what happened. I like to call it my higher power. Something clicked inside of me, and I went into the bathroom. He let me out. He didn't keep me locked in there all the time. I got up and I used the bathroom, and I looked in the mirror and I saw myself. And I don't know if anybody can relate to that, but how many times were y'all using it? You looked in the mirror, maybe you weren't able to look in the mirror, but you didn't really see anybody, right? Okay. Well, this moment, something happened and I saw me, right? And and in my mind, I see who I was, right, when I graduated and when I was little and I lived with my mom. And then I saw me now, and it wasn't me. So I left. Don't ask me what in me told me to leave. All I can say now is my higher power. And I left, and I had caught a DUI charge in the middle of this from before. And I went to my PO officer, and I said, please take me to jail. And I told him where I was at. Told him I didn't know what to do. He said, I can give you 2 options. You can do a year in county, or you can go to 30-day treatment. I said, 30-day treatment, please. So I go to that treatment center, right? And I'm not perfect. This story did not end, that rehab stop didn't end there. Like, I've relapsed, okay? Multiple times. Within a year, really. But that's okay, because every time I've relapsed, I've learned something from it. So it's okay if you don't get this right the first time, because every time I've stood up, I've gotten stronger. I eventually went to rehab one of the other times, and at that time, I didn't know what I was going to do. At that point, my mom didn't know what to do with me. A man I see as my father didn't know what to do with me. My brothers didn't know what to do with me. So my mom was like, you can stay here for a couple weeks until you can find a sober living house or, a halfway house or something. So, I had no idea what any of that was. I had heard of it. My grandma had lived in one, but I didn't even know where to start, so I went online. And I started Googling places, and I found a couple of things out of state. I think I'd seen Oxford pop up, but I didn't really know where to go with it. A girl that I had met in rehab was living in Oxford, and I didn't really like her. She got on my nerves. I thought she was dramatic, and she cried a lot. because I was mean. But anyway, I reached out to her. I reached out to a girl that I did not like because at that point I did not know what to do. And she calls me. And at that time, she was doing the waiting list. She said, Caroline, I really want to help you. Can you do an interview tomorrow? I said, an interview? Do I have to come in? Like, I don't have a car. My mom's going to work, blah, 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 making these excuses. And she was like, it's okay. You can do it over the phone. And I'm like, okay. Okay. So from that last run, and I kept returning back to, terrible things, I had gotten really dehydrated, and I had a couple broken ribs, so my mom took me to the hospital. Well, I called her, so I interviewed for Oxford House Cherokee in Louisville, Kentucky from a hospital bed, and they accepted me. And so I come to this house, right, and there's all these women, and they're all different women, okay, all different ages. They came from different backgrounds, different accents, all kinds of things. So I'm thinking, what the heck am I coming into? Because the only experience I'd had with a group of women was from strip clubs and trap houses, right? You don't trust them, okay? Because they're just as bad as me. I'm that girl you don't trust out there. So I moved in there, and it was the complete opposite. They showed me this room, and I had a bed, an actual bed, not just a mattress in the back of a shotgun house on the floor. This bed was up off the ground. The living spaces were clean. These girls were nice to me. Because when I came, I had nothing. I didn't have cigarettes, I didn't have food or anything, and those girls provided that for me because somebody else had done that for them. And so now I am alumni, I've moved out, but I still stay involved, and I do the same thing that those women did for me. So as unfortunate as it is that I had to go through all that, and as fortunate as it is that we have to endure that much trauma, and because even if you didn't go through anything like that, if you've used and you've had a madness, there's trauma that stays with us. So as unfortunate as it is of all that, I wouldn't give it up, and I see it as a blessing because now I get to be a part of this. So with that, I'm Caroline, and I'm a recovering addict. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's really hard to follow up all of these great stories right here. I'm going to try my best. Also, I'm not really used to microphones, so please forgive me. When I was a very young kid, growing up in Boston, Mass, there was this small strip. Yeah, I heard a couple woos out there. There was this small strip of Massachusetts Avenue that they called the Methadone Mile. If you know, that's you're either scoring dope or you're trading in your Suboxone or your methadone to go get dope. And I remember being a little kid saying to myself, I would never be one of them. Well, you know what they say, never say never. The opioid crisis has impacted me in a number of different ways. I kind of have a double-edged sword with the opioid crisis because I've been on both sides of it. As an addict, an active addiction, as well as being a first responder, working as a career firefighter and paramedic. I was helping my, thank you. Seriously, thank you for your support. I really thought I was helping my community while simultaneously tearing it down, as well as myself. I didn't get involved with opioids until I joined the Army. I remember I had a wicked bad toothache one day, and I went to the dentist, and they said, we got to remove a wisdom tooth. And I said, okay, I don't know what that means, but all right. They removed the wisdom tooth, and they gave me a prescription for oxycodone as well as hydrocodone. The Army don't play. And my roommate in the barracks at that time said, why would you just take these for the toothache? Like, you could really have some fun with these. And I said, what are you talking about? And that is when he taught me how to snort the medication. And when those prescriptions ran out, he said, I think it's time you go get another tooth removed. 4 wisdom teeth later, we were trying to figure out how we were going to sustain this habit. And we began injuring each other intentionally. My job in the Army was I was a combat medic. That being said, I spent a lot of time in the troop medical clinic where they kept all of the medication. And slowly but surely, it started with the 2 of us, and then it became 10, 20, up to 30 in this little pill mill that we were running and funneling drugs out of the TMC and in the company, in the battalion, in regiment. When I came off active duty, the pills dried up. Doctors at the VA said, you're not in any more pain. You don't need these pills anymore. And I said, are you sure? Because it'd be really cool if I did. What do I need to break? What do I need to hurt? That's how bad I wanted it. And I started getting in contact with other brothers of mine who had served that were, addicted to opiates as well, and that's when I got into heroin. Shortly after coming off of active duty, I got my job as a career firefighter and medic with the city of Petersburg, Virginia. The city of Petersburg is a very, very, very dangerous city, very high mortality rate, whether that be from overdose, stabbings, gunshots, you name it. A lot of drugs on the street. I ran an overdose call almost every tour I went on. At least once a week, I would run a fatal overdose in the city of Petersburg. I would respond to an overdose call. We would declare somebody dead on arrival, and instead of assisting the family or paying our respects, I was searching the house for where they kept their drugs, taking drugs out of their pockets, because that's how bad the disease got for me. I had a captain catch me stealing drugs on a call, on scene, and I said, well, this is the end of my career. And he simply looked at me and shook his head. Nothing was said, nothing was done. We ran another call 2 months later. It was a child who had called 911 saying that her mommy had been asleep for a long time and wouldn't wake up. And my captain pulled me into the room and he said, Proby, this is going to be you one day. And it hit me really hard. Even when faced with the ultimate end result of what this disease would do to me, I continued to use. And I led a double life. On one hand, I was serving my country, serving my community, and on the other hand, I was killing myself. It's funny how fate has a way of, just working things out. My last shift as a firefighter before I was terminated, I decided that I didn't want to clean toilets that day, so I swapped positions with my friend JD, and I said, let me chauffeur today, let me drive. And he said, are you sure? I said, yes, please, I don't want to wash toilets today. And it just so happened that I had used the night before, and we were headed to a fire, and I was very excited. I struck a car, and as soon as I felt that thump, I said, nope, this is where my career is over. Sure enough, I was drug tested, and ultimately terminated. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. I was already homeless at that point because I had spent what money I made serving my community on drugs. I went to the Army for help. They said they could not help me. They tried once. It had failed. I'd exhausted every effort. I was alone. My friends were no longer my friends because I wasn't making money anymore. My family had neglected me. Not neglected me, I will say they cut me off, realistically, because I deserved it. My family cut me off, and I was living in the streets of Petersburg in my truck, going to the firehouses that I used to work at to beg for food, to get money for food. If they would at least let me stay in the living room. It was the most humbling experience of my life. And I remember being in my truck saying, God, if you're real, if you're a thing, help me, please. I had gotten a call back from the American Addiction Center or whatever, and they said that even though I didn't have any insurance and I didn't have any money, they had a spot for me at their treatment center. And it was a blessing. 70 days later, still homeless, did not know what I was going to do after treatment, so terrified. And my case manager told me about this program called Oxford House. I showed up to an Oxford House in Richmond, Oxford House Carver, with all I had to my name in the back of my truck. And I said, I have money, I just got out of treatment, I'm homeless, can I interview and try to get a place to stay? And they saw all this stuff in the back of my car, and they said, well, where are you gonna go if we say no? I said, I'll probably just sleep right outside of here. They accepted me and I moved in. Literally on 9/11, 2018. By the way, I don't think I started by saying, I am Ron McLaren. I am an individual in recovery. My sobriety date is July 14th, 2018. I am so grateful, not only for this organization, but as a whole, but all of you sitting here in the audience. Because without you guys, I wouldn't be here. This wouldn't be really look at how many people are here right now. Look at how many lives have been impacted by this program. I see people from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds. I've met you, I've spoken to you, all different parts of the country. And it is just a miracle and such a humbling experience to be in front of all of you. Clean and sober. Roof over our heads, food in our mouths. And most of all, I'm thankful to my higher power, because without him, none of this would have been possible. I want to end this with a story that just shows you how real the opiate crisis is now. Now, 3 years ago, I ran a call at a shady motel in the city of Petersburg called the Flagship Inn. We got called for an overdose. Go figure. We showed up. It was a DOA. Upon further investigation, we found out there was a man staying on the floor directly below that had been partying with the gentleman that was our DOA. We go into his room. He's nodding out. We take him to the hospital. Before we can even get through the bay doors of the ER, he is dead. CPR had been ceased. He was gone. While we were still on scene loading that second gentleman into the ambulance, there was a third gentleman who came out who was just as coherent as I stand in front of you and said, I was just partying with those guys 2 hours ago. I think I want to go to the hospital and get looked at too, because that don't look right. We came back to the hospital 5 hours later with another call completely unrelated to find out that that gentleman, who was just as fine as I stand right here now, was dead. I hate to end on such a somber note, but ladies and gentlemen, that is the crisis that faces us today. And it's individuals like the members of this panel, and physicians and psychiatrists, but most importantly, us right here in this audience. It's up to us to do what we can to at least mitigate that. I'm thankful to be here, and I'm thankful to speak to you, and I'm thankful to call you all brothers and sisters in recovery. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. I know you're in a rush to listen to the exciting election speeches and to get the right folks out here in front of you, but finally, one last round of applause for our entire panel today. Thank you, everybody.